Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we're going to be talking about a massive data breach of a U.S. telecom giant known as Charter Communications. You may not be familiar with Charter Communications themselves, but they are pretty large. They have 92,000 employees and provide internet, mobile, video, and voice services to more than 32 million customers and 57 million homes across the United States. You may know them as Spectrum, rather than the parent company, Charter Communications. Spectrum, in fact, is the largest cable operator in the United States, if you still have cable for some reason, but they also offer plenty of other services across 41 different states, so not the entire US, but I do know they are actually rather common here in the Midwest and even Chicago itself. Thankfully, I don't use them, and you will see thankfully why very soon. They confirmed a data breach earlier this week, but said that attackers did not steal any sensitive personal customer information. The statement they made specifically says, no sensitive personal information, PI, or customer proprietary network information, CPNI, data was exfiltrated by the threat actor as a result of recent activity. Unfortunately, however, this may not be entirely true. Charter did not make any further statements and has declined to comment further on the scenario when prompted by a couple of my sources, but someone was very, very willing to make a statement. And that someone is none other than the Shiny Hunters ransomware group. They claimed responsibility for the attack. Allegedly, they breached the company's systems on April 1st, April Fool's Day, how fitting, in a voice phishing, also known as a vishing attack. They were able to call someone at Spectrum, or Charter Communications, and compromise an employee's Microsoft account. They were likely pretending to be that employee who was locked out and needed help. After they compromised that account, they used this access to steal 42 million records from the company's Salesforce instance. This is a pretty common tactic used by the Shiny Hunters. They really love exploiting Salesforce, and yeah, I can see why they're pretty good at it, and it has a lot of this valuable customer data. But what exactly did they steal? Customer and business customer names, email addresses, physical addresses, phone numbers, phone types, phone plan information, support ticket data, and some CPNI data. Charter Communications refused to pay any ransom demanded by the Shiny Hunters, and as a result, that data was quickly leaked onto the Shiny Hunters dark web leak site. After this data was leaked, it was published to Have I Been Pwned, which is a website where you can check if you have been exposed in a data breach. I recommend checking every so often, or even subscribing to get alerts when you are pwned. This is not sponsored, I just enjoy their service and think it's valuable. According to Have I Been Pwned, 4.9 million unique email addresses, along with names, phone numbers, and physical addresses, have been associated with each other. There was also a subset of data, 85,000 records specifically, that originated from an internal employee directory. It doesn't seem like very much was taken from this internal employee directory, thankfully. Not any social security numbers, at least, or anything like that, which would be really bad. But it does include some job titles, as well as some of the owner information I mentioned earlier, like names, email, addresses. The FBI has recommended against paying ransomware groups such as the Shiny Hunters because there is no guarantee that they will give you any of your data back. And this is true. Threat actors can just not give it back. They're allowed to lie. They're already operating illegally. They can just keep it. They can extort you with the same data later. But they do have a motivation to destroy any data they stole for a pretty important reason. If they have a reputation for leaking data anyways, despite a ransom being paid, that's a really good way to get no one to ever pay your ransoms. So most threat actors will stick with their word. It puts companies in a very tough position, though. I think Spectrum, in a way, was right not to pay the ransom, because it really just encourages threat actors to keep doing this. Though, unfortunately, paying the ransom seems to be pretty standard. It almost always happens from the stories I tell. And the unfortunate outcome of that is data getting leaked. And so the vicious cycle continues. Very few people choose not to pay the ransom, standing up against these ransomware groups. But really, it's everyone who does just fold and pay immediately who keeps funding these operations. I'm not trying to blame anyone in particular for their ransomware strategies because, well, without access to your data, you can't do a lot of work, and if your data gets leaked, you may have sensitive information that you are legally obligated to protect, and you could be violating the law if you have not been adequately protecting that data, even if someone hacked you. The rise of cybersecurity insurance also promotes just paying a ransomware actor to just kind of forget about the whole thing, as well as the whole career of ransomware negotiator. Sure, it may not be the recommended outcome by the government, but really, it's often a very difficult choice, and whether it's between getting your data back and being able to run your company and not being able to do that, a lot of people would rather keep their jobs and their business going. Spectrum likely had to think long and hard about the impact of doing either thing. Would paying the ransom or letting the data get leaked have the worst outcome? And risk isn't necessarily monetary risk, like if they were to pay the ransom, it's a monetary risk. It can also come in the form of a reputational risk, which is more involved in letting that data leak, or of course, legal and compliance governance risk. If that data is supposed to be protected in some specific way, that it turns out was not quite up to standard. Either way, the data is out there, and people who've had their data leak are more likely to become victims of phishing attacks. Many ransomware actors and other types of threat actors will hop right on the opportunity of this data being breached to try to compromise you by sending fake things from either Spectrum, allegedly, when it's just them pretending to be Spectrum, or other services like identity protection services. So, if you are affected by this data breach, just stay aware. Check to make sure any email you may receive about it is, in fact, legitimate, and not just someone trying to rub salt in the wound. Thank you to Security Week, Bleeping Computers, Cyber News, Tech Radar, and Security Affairs for information on this attack and data breach. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and until next time, stay secure.